In a world where monsters and gardens come together to form an alliance, that alliance brings together 2 men and 6 bottles of fertilizer. What we have here is the makings of a classic, a monster garden classic. Enjoy.
Great topic. Sugars, sweeteners, products that will change the aroma or flavor of your product. There's a number of nutrient manufacturers out there that are putting out quote-unquote sweeteners. I like to call them carbohydrates because that's what they are. But different types of complex sugars in a bottle with a scent or what is stated as a flavor. Here's one. It's called Sweet. This product states that it has a scent called Original Berry. Another product here called Sugary. Smells like cough syrup, like sweet cough syrup.
Baby cough syrup.
Baby cough syrup. Here we have another product called Sour D. Not apple cough syrup, but that's apple candy. Here's another one, which this company has it in like 5 different flavors. We just picked one. Blueberry Dream. Like a blueberry alcohol. Something's fermenting in there. Interesting products. We like to sell products with information. And these products are being sold with information. But a lot of our gardeners that are looking for these products truly believe that they're going to feed this to their plants, and over time, it's going to be taken up systemically, and it's going to allow them to have some sort of effect with their garden production. If you tried to put different elements in your reservoir as a grower before these products exist, maybe pineapple juice,
Grape juice, pineapple juice.
those guys did that as a test, and we heard growers that have done it, especially early on in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s. And, you know, there was statements that it made a flavor change or difference. So what I would like is your interpretation. Since you represent Growmore, I mean, you guys have been around since
1917.
1917.
Well, right off the bat, you know, the main difference we're seeing with some of the sweeteners that are commonly in the market today, the majority of them are all sugarcane based, which is sucrose. Unfortunately, the misconception that the scent of the liquid that you're putting it in to your plant is somehow going to change the flavor or scent of your finished product. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. The problem with these sugarcane based sweeteners that are sucrose based is that the microorganisms these carbohydrates are intended to feed are actually not the source that microorganisms can feed on.
So you're saying it's a different type of sugar in here than what you would typically feed the microbes in your garden.
Right, a fruit
in your rhizosphere. So when you're trying to feed the microbes in your rhizosphere, what sugars would you typically be using?
You'd want to use a molasses-based sugar, right? You know, the glucose, fructose-based sugars. Unfortunately, I think the misnomer is that these molecules can somehow enter the plant through the root zone. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, all sugar molecules are too large to enter the root zone themselves. The root exudates its own carbohydrates and own sugars that the microorganisms feed on, and those are actually probably more effective and beneficial and in a form that they can take up, the microbes. However, if you are going to be using one of the 4 carbohydrate sources, you know, typically we look at humate sources, we look at fish fertilizer, we look at seaweed, which is kelp, and we look at the molasses-based carbohydrate sources. So in this particular instance, the only sugar source that the microorganisms can feed off of and utilize is the molasses-based sweetener.
Okay.
So,
and you're not getting any molasses with these products?
You're not getting any molasses. The benefit, and I've heard people say, oh, I use product X and I've noticed that my plants are happier with it. Mm-hmm. Well, they're not happier because of whatever the sugarcane that's in it. They're happier because of the magnesium or the sulfur that's within the solution.
I see. And does the plant have the ability to translocate these sugars?
The plant does not have the ability to translate these sugars. These sugar molecules are too large to enter the root zone. It's impossible. No matter what chelating agents or other form that the sugars are entering into the media, they aren't going to be able to enter the root zone.
Whether it's sucrose or
glucose or fructose-based sugar, no, it doesn't matter. So, like I said, even the now we've gotten that out of the way.
Well, hold on. The high fructose corn syrup that's in my Gatorade, that's not going to translocate.
No, so these sucrose.
That's another product that we've heard about.
Oh yeah, Gatorade. So yeah, the fructose sucrose-based products don't do that. So when you look at the glucose-based products, like the molasses-based sweeteners, which are very few on the market, you have to look at it from a beneficial bacteria, mycorrhizal, fungal and bacterial spores, and what's the benefit that they're getting. And at the end of the day, they're not going to see any benefit from any sugarcane-based sweeteners.
Can you give me an example of a product that would be a good humic-based source that you could recommend?
Well, yeah, let's say we're going to be brewing a tea, we want to make it fungal dominant. I definitely recommend using 8% humic acid that we make. Growmore makes an 8% humic acid with a 4% fulvic. So you're kind of getting the best benefits of both worlds. The difference between the humics and the fulvics is that there's a higher carbohydrate content in the humic acid than the fulvic. The lighter gold that you get, the less carbohydrate content there is. So the less it's doing, fulvic acid is doing less for your microorganisms and more for the chelating function as a chelating agent for your micronutrients.
I see.
But yeah, we definitely would recommend the 8% humic acid source, or you can always also go with, some people recommend using a seaweed-based kelp source like our 11% organic seaweed. That'll also be a good option as well.
So you growers out there, you're using Great White, which we don't think is a great blend, but maybe you're using Extreme Gardening's Mycos, or you're using VAM. You're basically using a mycorrhizae product, and you're using it heavily. This is a great recommendation of looking at a food source for that mycorrhizae. We would be looking at a humic acid or a humate versus a molasses. So it's very good because it's very good for the outdoor growers to know, because we have a lot of outdoor growers that are actually doing a lot more fungal amendment than they actually are doing a bacterial amendment.
And now the fungal amendments actually are the most beneficial at the root zone application. So in commercial agriculture, for example, in an almond orchard, they will actually dig a side planting hole, and fill that mycorrhizal in there, because just putting a wettable mycorrhizal powder in the water on top around the base and watering it in, it's really inefficient. It's actually got to make root zone contact. So as a grower, when you're getting ready to transplant, it's really important to make sure that you get that mycorrhiza, whether you put it in a granular form or the wettable powder, making sure that you make that root zone contact. As soon as that mycorrhizal spore attaches to the root zone, the mycelium and the rhizosphere within that media will actually create that highway, and once it's attached to the root zone, it's attached to the root zone. So I love to always say, once you build up that fungal space initially, make sure that you can inoculate eventually to try to feed it, but once it's attached to your root zone, it's in there. So don't focus so much on that, and focus on your bacterial spores and the bacillus product, which is why a product you mentioned earlier is not a great blend. Typically, any blends that have mycorrhizal and bacillus spores together is creating an environment of competition.
Yeah, after
a
few days, one succeeds, and what you basically purchased is only half of it is really existing with the plant, and be creating that symbiotic relationship. So if I was to feed the bacteria in my medium, and I wanted to make sure that those guys were taken care of, what would be your recommended carbohydrate that would be more similar to a molasses?
I'd recommend the Growmore's Mendocino honey for a few reasons. One, besides being unsulfured blackstrap molasses that we get directly from the mills, it's also got some soil amendment properties. So anybody that's growing in cocoa or soil or sunshine number 4 mix that are blended, besides the outdoor gardeners, if you're growing indoor, it's definitely going to be beneficial for a few reasons. One is the soil amendment capacity of the yucca extract within the solution. So if you have an issue where maybe your environment's really warm and you're having to water, your media is drying out a lot, or it's very uneven in the ways that it's drying out, using the Mendocino honey is going to definitely help keep that media
a wetting agent.
It's almost like a wetting agent and a soil penetrant, or we say soil penetrants in the industry, but that also relates to cocoa or any other mixes that people are doing with various different sorts of soil or amending medias that are in the industry.
I used to use yucca sugar extract, and it's like a thick syrup, but once you put it in water, it turns into almost like a foamy soap. And so that's why in my mind it's always been thought of as a wetting agent, just so you see the foaming when you mix it up.
But it also has montromolinite in it, which is a volcanic ash extract that has over 70 trace elements. So getting back to the whole holistic gardening approach, and taking things on from all angles while using pure blackstrap molasses in a reservoir, is sometimes dangerous. You got to think this is an organic compound, right? There are things that can go anaerobic really quickly if you're using a reservoir without adequate circulation or oxygen. Recommendation for me on people that are using recirculating reservoirs, or when you're mixing up the Mendocino honey, always try to pre-agitate it in a separate container, maybe a gallon jug.
Warm water.
It doesn't necessarily have to be warm water.
Not cold. Cold water, it seems like it doesn't do it. When I've used it,
It's the coagulating effect, just like any real molasses, right? So if you can separately agitate it, then add it to your res, that's great. For guys that are doing DWC or recirculating systems, the one thing that I've heard from them is that on the last day before they do a res change, and this is true for drip emitters, is to just put it into the reservoir the last day, and then they're inoculating it once a week. You know, for those growers that are doing drain to waste, I would definitely recommend being able to safe to put it in every feed.
My recommendation to guys running DWC systems was to do a pre-diluted amount, as you stated, in a watering can, and right before they do the reservoir change, just basically splash each plant in a watering can, just top dress it. And to be honest, you can use that same recommendation of expensive amendments that you don't want to put in your 100 or 200 gallon reservoir. Always top feed the most expensive amendments so you're going to get the best and longest use out of them. Nectar for the Gods makes a product called Aphrodite'S Extraction. It's a unique form of those 3 sugars, and it doesn't state that there's any flavor enhancement or change because they're one of those companies that more stick to the guns of reality. And that would probably be Monster Garden's recommendation for those products. It's great to know that there is a molasses-based product that actually has some boutique features that are going to give you above and beyond what a standard molasses ever would, and a comparable price point. Thank you for watching.
If you'd like a fungal dominant tea, you typically want to use, as we mentioned, the 4 carbohydrate sources earlier, you want to use a humic-based carbohydrate source to create a fungal dominant tea. The problem with fungal spores and bacterial spores is typically bacterial spores always win. So the molasses and the glucose-based carbohydrates that are feeding actually feed the molasses. The molasses is feeding the bacterial spores. So they're propagating at a greater rate, and unfortunately they're inhibiting those fungal colonies, and they're pushing them aside because they're dominating this space.
So if I was a gardener that was a indoor-outdoor and I was using an amazing amount of fungal activity in my root zone, so I was adding supplements, maybe I added my soil, but my goal is to have a beautiful mycorrhizal field in my rhizosphere. Is it maybe not the best source to get a molasses-based sugar and use that as a feeding tool to the fungal?
Yeah, no, I would definitely recommend a humate-based source at that point.
So we talked about your mycorrhizae field or your fungal bed inside of your rhizosphere being a great source for creating that symbiotic relationship with the root zone, but your recommended food program for those guys is going to be a humate or a humic acid, which Growmore actually makes one of the most inexpensive humic acids. They also have a really nice fulvic humic acid as well called the amber humic.
Yeah, the amber humic. And our humic acid is registered with CDFA Organic Input Material Registration, safe and approved for use in organic food production and overall organic production of flowers as well.